Take it. It's your property.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have you ever lost something so precious that your heart stopped beating? You've ever felt that moment when everything you love could disappear forever? Have you ever watched someone who has nothing choose between right and wrong? This story will shake everything you believe about human nature. Has someone ever judged you by how you look? Have you ever been invisible to the world around you? What if the person everyone ignores holds the power to destroy or save a life? What if one choice could change two worlds forever? What I'm about to tell you happened in a small coffee shop in downtown Seattle. But it's happening right now in every corner of our world. A billionaire was executing a plan, not just to close the biggest deal of his life, but to prove he deserved the love that was slipping through his fingers. The worst part? His wife already knew about his failures. Everyone knew. Everyone except the one person who could save him. If your entire world collapsed in one moment, what would break first? Your pride, your heart, or your faith in humanity itself? Subscribe now and turn on the notifications bell before we continue to the main story. Marcus Sterling adjusted his $3,000 watch and stepped out of his black Tesla. The morning Seattle rain kissed his perfectly styled hair as he looked up at the small coffee shop that would change his life forever. Inside his jacket pocket, his phone buzzed with another text from his wife, Sarah. He didn't need to read it. The wedding ring on his finger felt heavier than usual, 22 years of marriage weighing him down like an anchor. Mr. Sterling. His assistant Jenny rushed up behind him, her heels clicking on the wet pavement. The investors are already inside. They're waiting for the final presentation. Marcus nodded, his mind elsewhere. Today's deal would make him richer than he'd ever dreamed. But Sarah's words from last night echoed in his head. Money can't buy back the time you've stolen from us, Marcus. It can't buy back love. The coffee shop bell jingled as he entered. It was nothing special. Worn wooden tables, mismatched chairs, the smell of burnt coffee mixing with Seattle rain. But the Japanese investors loved authentic American experiences. They wanted to meet here instead of his billion-dollar office. In the corner booth sat three men in expensive suits. They smiled and bowed slightly as Marcus approached. This was it. The deal that would secure his company's future. The deal that might save his marriage. But as Marcus reached to shake hands with Mr. Yamamoto, something happened that made his blood run cold. His wedding ring slipped off his finger. Time seemed to stop as a thin band of white gold fell through the air. Marcus watched in horror as it bounced once on the table, rolled across the worn wood, and disappeared into shadows beneath the next booth. The booth where a homeless man sat hunched over a single cup of coffee. Marcus had noticed him when he walked in, dirty green jacket, gray beard, eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of pain. The kind of person Marcus usually walked past without a second thought. Now, that same man was reaching down toward the floor, toward Marcus's wedding ring. The ring Sarah had placed on his finger 22 years ago, promising to love him through everything. The ring that was the last thread connecting him to the woman who had built him up from nothing. The homeless man's weather hand closed around something small and metallic. Marcus felt his world begin to crumble as their eyes met across the coffee shop. The homeless man's name was David Rodriguez, and he hadn't always lived on the streets. 3 years ago, he wore a different uniform, army green, with sergeant stripes earned through 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had a small apartment, a steady job at a warehouse, and dreams of rebuilding his life after the war. Then the nightmares started getting worse. The sound of explosions that only he could hear. The faces of friends who didn't come home. The government checks stopped coming when they said his PTSD wasn't service-connected. David lost his job first, then his apartment. Finally, his pride. Now he sat in Brew and Bean coffee shop every Tuesday morning, nursing the same cup of coffee for 3 hours. The owner, Mrs. Chun, pretended not to notice. She had a soft heart for broken soldiers. This Tuesday started like all the others. David watched important people rush past his corner booth, talking loudly into phones about deals and money, and problems that seemed so small compared to watching your best friend die in a desert far from home. Then the billionaire walked in. David recognized him immediately. Marcus Sterling, the man whose face appeared on business magazines. the man who owned half the buildings David slept behind. David watched as Sterling shook hands with the Japanese men, watched his confidence fill the small space like expensive cologne. Everything about him screamed success, power, control. That's when the ring fell. Such a small thing. A tiny circle of gold that probably cost more than David had seen in months. It bounced once on the businessman's table, rolled across the scratch wood, and landed right at David's feet. David's weathered hand reached down slowly. His fingers, stained from weeks of living rough, closed around the smooth metal. It was warm from Sterling's skin, and David could see an inscription inside. To Marcus, forever yours, Sarah. 2002. 22 years of marriage. David had been married once too, before the war changed everything. Before Maria couldn't handle his screaming nightmares anymore. He looked up and met Sterling's eyes across the coffee shop. The billionaire's face was white with panic, his mouth slightly open in shock. The Japanese investors were talking among themselves, unaware of the drama unfolding just feet away. David had two choices. He could slip the ring into his pocket, walk out of the coffee shop, and sell it for enough money to eat for months, get a cheap hotel room, buy some clean clothes. No one would blame a homeless veteran for taking what a careless rich man had dropped. Or he could do something else entirely. Sterling started to stand up, his chair scraping against the floor. He took a step toward David's booth, his expensive shoes quiet on the worn linoleum. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think you found something that belongs to me." David looked down at the ring in his palm. He thought about his empty stomach, his wet sleeping bag, the way people looked through him like he was invisible. Then he thought about the inscription, about Sarah, whoever she was, about promises made 22 years ago. David's decision would change everything, but not in the way anyone expected, because as he opened his mouth to speak, the coffee shop door burst open with such force that everyone inside jumped. A woman stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her dark hair, her eyes scanning the room desperately. "Marcus," she called out, her voice breaking. "Marcus, we need to talk. Right now." It was Sarah Sterling, and she was holding divorce papers. The coffee shop fell silent, except for the steady drip of rain against the windows. Sarah Sterling stood in the doorway like a storm that had finally arrived. Her usually perfect hair was messy from the rain, her designer coat wrinkled, but her eyes burned with 22 years of hurt and anger. "Don't you dare ignore me this time, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying across the small space. "Not when you're about to sign another deal that matters more than our marriage." Marcus felt every eye in the coffee shop turned toward him. The Japanese investors whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Yamamoto checked his expensive watch and frowned. "Sarah, please," Marcus said quietly, his voice shaking. "Can we discuss this later? I'm in the middle of..." "The middle of what?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Another billion-dollar deal? Another reason to work 18-hour days? Another excuse to miss our anniversary dinner like you did last week." David watched from his corner booth, the wedding ring still warm in his palm. He had seen this before. Marriages destroyed by war, by money, by the things that were supposed to make life better, but only made it emptier. Marcus took a step toward his wife, but she held up the papers like a shield. "I've been waiting for you to choose, Marcus. For months, I've been waiting. But you've already chosen, haven't you? You chose everything else." The Japanese investors began gathering their papers. Mr. Yamamoto stood up and bowed politely. "Perhaps we should reschedule, Sterling-san. This seems to be a personal matter." "No." Marcus spun around, panic in his voice. "Gentlemen, please. This deal means everything to..." "Everything to what, Marcus?" Sarah's voice was getting louder. "To your bank account? To your ego? When did it stop meaning everything to us?" That's when David made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up slowly, his old bones creaking from too many nights on cold concrete. The coffee shop was small, and in 3 steps he was standing between Marcus and Sarah, still holding the ring. "Ma'am," David said quietly to Sarah, his voice rough from years of not using it much. "I think this belongs to your husband." He opened his weathered hand, revealing the wedding ring glinting in the coffee shop's dim light. Sarah's eyes went wide. She looked at the ring, then at David, then at Marcus. You lost it?" Marcus couldn't speak. The symbol of their marriage, lost and found by a stranger. The metaphor was too perfect, too painful. David continued, his voice gentle. "I've been watching you two for 5 minutes, and I can see something that maybe you can't." He looked at Marcus. "You're scared, not of losing money or deals. You're scared of losing her." Then he looked at Sarah. "And you're not here to end things. You're here because you're scared too. Scared is already gone." The coffee shop was dead silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. David held the ring toward Marcus. But before the billionaire could take it, the veteran did something unexpected. He turned to Sarah instead. "Ma'am, 22 years ago, you put this ring on his finger and made a promise. He made one too." David's voice was steady, strong. "I don't know what's broken between you two, but I know what it looks like when someone has given up fighting." He paused, looking at both of them. "Neither of you has given up fighting. You're both still here." Sarah's hands were shaking as she stared at the ring. The divorce papers slipped from her fingers and scattered on the coffee shop floor. Marcus stepped forward slowly. "Sarah, Don't," she whispered, tears starting to fall. "Don't say anything yet. Just put the ring back on." But as Marcus reached for the ring in David's palm, something happened that no one saw coming. The coffee shop door chimed again, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside, water dripping from his expensive umbrella. "Mr. Sterling," the man said in a cold voice. "I'm Agent Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." The ring fell from David's hand and rolled across the floor as federal agents poured into the small coffee shop, their badges flashing like lightning in the storm that had just become Marcus Sterling's life. "There's been a mistake," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper as Agent Morrison stepped closer. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't you?" Morrison pulled out a thick folder. $3 million missing from your company's pension fund. Money that belonged to your employees. Money you used to fund this deal with the Japanese investors. Sarah's face went white. "Marcus, tell me that's not true. Tell me you didn't steal from the people who trusted you." The Japanese investors were already backing toward the door, their billion-dollar deal forgotten. Mr. Yamamoto looked at Marcus like he was seeing a stranger. "I was going to pay it back," Marcus said desperately. "This deal would have covered everything. No one would have been hurt, except the 60-year-old security guard who can't retire because his pension disappeared." Morrison said coldly, "Except the single mother in accounting who's been putting money away for her daughter's college." David watched from his corner as two agents moved toward Marcus with handcuffs. The wedding ring had rolled under a nearby table, forgotten in the chaos. Just like David himself was usually forgotten, but something inside David, something that had been sleeping since Afghanistan, suddenly woke up. "Wait," David said, his voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at the homeless man who had been invisible just minutes before. "Agent Morrison," David continued, walking slowly toward the federal agent. "Before you arrest him, there's something you need to know." Morrison frowned. "Sir, this is official FBI business. Please step aside." "I'm not stepping aside," David said firmly, "because I've been sitting in this coffee shop every Tuesday for 6 months, and I've been watching Marcus Sterling." Sarah looked confused. Marcus stared at David like he was seeing him for the first time. David continued, his voice getting stronger. "Every Tuesday he comes here, not for business meetings. He sits alone at that table over there, and he makes phone calls." David pointed to a small table by the window. "Phone calls to his employees, checking on the security guard's wife who has cancer, asking about the accountant's daughter's grades. He doesn't know I can hear him, but I've got nothing else to do but listen." Morrison's expression changed slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Marcus Sterling didn't steal that money for himself," David said. "He borrowed it to save his company, to keep from laying off 200 people during the recession." David walked over and picked up the wedding ring from under the table. He held it up so everyone could see. This ring represents 22 years of marriage. But more than that, it represents 22 years of a man trying to be a hero, trying to save everyone around him, even when it meant destroying himself. He looked directly at Agent Morrison. You want to arrest someone? Arrest the bank executives who caused a recession. Arrest the politicians who bailed them out while small companies like Sterling Industries went under. But don't arrest a man for trying to save jobs when everyone else gave up. The coffee shop was silent, except for the rain still pounding against the windows. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Is that true, Marcus? Is that why you've been working so hard? To save the company? To save everyone's jobs? Marcus looked at his wife, then at David, then at the agents surrounding him. For the first time in months, he told the complete truth. I lost everything in 2008, he said quietly. The recession wiped out our savings, our investments. But I couldn't let 200 families lose their jobs too. So I took money from the pension fund, thinking I could pay it back before anyone noticed. He looked at Sarah. I've been trying to fix it for 2 years. Every deal, every late night, every missed dinner. It was all to pay back what I took, to be the husband and boss everyone deserved. Agent Morrison looked at his folder, then at David, then back at Marcus. Mr. Sterling, what you did was still illegal. Intent doesn't change the law. No, David said, stepping closer to Morrison, but it changes justice. David held up the wedding ring again. This man didn't steal for greed. He stole for love. Love for his employees, love for his wife, love for doing what's right even when it destroys him. David turned to face the entire coffee shop. I'm a homeless veteran who society threw away, but I recognize honor when I see it. And Marcus Sterling has more honor in his little finger than most people have in their whole body. Then David did something that shocked everyone in the room. He walked over to Agent Morrison and held out his wrists. If you want to arrest someone for crime of caring too much, David said, arrest me too. Because if loving people enough to sacrifice yourself is wrong, then we're all guilty. What happened next would make headlines across the country and change 3 lives forever. But first, Agent Morrison had to make a choice that would define what justice really means. Agent Morrison stared at David's outstretched wrists for what felt like forever. The entire coffee shop held its breath. Sarah with tears still streaming down her face, Marcus frozen between hope and despair, even Mrs. Shin peeking out from behind the counter. Sir, Morrison said quietly to David, you don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly, David replied, his voice steady as steel. I'm asking you to remember that justice isn't about punishment. It's about making things right. Morrison looked at his folder again, then at Marcus, then back at David. Something in the FBI agent's face was changing. Mr. Sterling, Morrison said slowly, you admit to taking $3 million from your employee's pension fund? Marcus nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes. And you intended to pay it back? Every penny, with interest. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something no one expected. He closed his folder and looked at David. Sergeant Rodriguez. Morrison said. David's eyes widened in surprise. How did you? Your name came up in our investigation. You worked security at Sterling Industries before you became homeless. You were one of the employees whose pension was affected. The coffee shop gasped. Sarah looked at David in shock. Marcus's mouth fell open. Morrison continued. You had every right to hate Marcus Sterling. Your pension money was part of what went missing. But instead of anger, you chose to defend him. Why? David was quiet for a moment, the wedding ring still warm in his palm. Because I learned something in Afghanistan that most people never figure out. The measure of a man isn't what he has or what he's lost. It's what he does when everything falls apart. He looked at Marcus. This man could have declared bankruptcy and walked away. He could have let everyone else suffer while he protected himself. Instead, he's been killing himself for 2 years trying to fix his mistake. David turned back to Morrison. That's not a criminal. That's a hero who lost his way. Morrison nodded slowly. Mr. Sterling, here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over 51% of your company to your employees. They'll own the business they've been saving. You'll work for them now, and every penny of profit goes to paying back their pensions with 20% interest. Marcus looked stunned. Ah, yes. Yes, of course. And you, Morrison said to David, are going to be the employee representative on the board of directors. Someone needs to make sure Sterling keeps his word. Agent Morrison, David said, I'm homeless. I have no qualifications for her. You have the only qualification that matters, Morrison interrupted. You know the difference between right and wrong, even when it costs you everything. Sarah stepped forward, wiping her eyes. Marcus, is this what you want? To start over? To lose control of your company? Marcus looked at his wife, then at David, then at the wedding ring. For the first time in 2 years, he smiled. Sarah, I lost control of everything that mattered a long time ago. I lost you. I lost myself. Maybe it's time to find out who I really am when I'm not trying to be everyone's hero. He took the wedding ring from David's hand and looked at it. 22 years ago, I promised to love you for better or worse. I forgot about the better part. Sarah took the ring from him and, with shaking hands, placed it back on his finger. Then let's start over. Together this time. 6 months later, Sterling Industries was thriving under employee ownership. Marcus worked 12-hour days, not in a corner office, but on the factory floor alongside the people he'd once employed. He made a third of his old salary and was happier than he'd been in years. David had a small apartment above the coffee shop and a salary that let him eat 3 meals a day. More importantly, he had a purpose. The employees trusted him to keep Marcus honest, and he took that responsibility seriously. Sarah and Marcus renewed their vows on a Tuesday morning in Brew and Bean Coffee Shop. Mrs. Chen closed early so they could have the place to themselves. David was Marcus's best man. Agent Morrison attended the ceremony, too. Turns out he'd grown up poor and understood that sometimes good people make bad choices for good reasons. The story made national news. Homeless veteran saves billionaire's marriage and soul. But David hated the headlines. He told reporters the truth was simpler. Marcus Sterling didn't need saving, David would say. He needed someone to see who he really was underneath all that fear and guilt. Sometimes we all need someone to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart. The wedding ring that started it all sits on Marcus's finger today, a little more scratched than before. But Sarah says that's perfect. The best promises, she learned, are the ones that survive being broken and put back together. And every Tuesday morning, Marcus and David still meet at Brew and Bean, not as billionaire and homeless man, but as friends who learn that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be found in the kindness of strangers who choose to see the good in us, even when we can't see it ourselves. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you'd never think to look at twice. Sometimes changing everything starts with a simple choice to do what's right. And sometimes a lost wedding ring finds its way home to the hands of someone who understands what promises really mean. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. How many David Rodriguez's do you walk past every day without seeing them? How many people are fighting invisible battles while the world looks right through them? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that heroes don't always wear expensive suits. Sometimes they wear worn-out jackets and carry hearts bigger than their bank accounts. Comment below, have you ever been surprised by kindness from an unexpected source? Have you ever been the David Rodriguez in someone else's story? Your experiences could inspire our next life-changing tale. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because next we're sharing another incredible true story. The janitor who inherited a fortune. What he did with it will restore your faith in humanity. Remember, every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Every small act of kindness creates ripples that can change the world.